An original
from Story Studio Network.
Hi, I'm Dean Gation, and this is the Powerful Connections Podcast. Welcome to Season 2. For many years, my efforts as a service provider were focused on developing, planning, and building high-voltage projects. Whether it is transmission lines, substations, distribution systems, or connecting generation, projects with my involvement have been successful. My company, DGG5 Advising, is the opportunity maker you need for your energy and construction projects. This season, my guests and I will focus on specific topics of interest and bring them to light in interesting discussions. On this episode of Powerful Connections, we will discuss a number of points related to project execution planning in the energy sector. We have with us today two very interesting guests from INNERGEX Renewables Inc., Julie Turgeon, VP Construction, and Amélie Morissette, Senior Strategic Planning Manager. This is exciting. Welcome to you both. Amélie, please introduce yourself to our listeners.
Sure. Thanks for the intro, Dean. And it's a pleasure to reconnect actually with you. We met probably 10, 15 years ago, and we keep a connection here and there. So thanks for the invite. It's a really great occasion actually to reconnect and to have a chance to discuss about the energy market. I joined INNERGEX actually in the last summer in 2024 as a Senior Strategic Planning Manager. I joined actually Julie's team, part of the construction group. I joined right away and taking a role of project manager for one of our medium-scale solar and battery project in Hawaii. And prior to actually INNERGEX, I worked 5 years at Brookfield in Sault Ste. Marie, Ontario, and I was part of the asset management group. So that was a little bit different than construction, more on the operation side. And I supported with a number of OPEX, CAPEX projects, and they're in our compliance for our Ontario asset. Prior to being more on the operation as a owner, I was working for BBA, engineering consulting firm, and joined a couple of different offices in Labrador City and Toronto, and I started in Quebec, actually at the head office. So I was supporting industrial mining and also IPP during the different RFP processes and for their development project mainly. So I'm electrical engineer, almost 20 years now. I had like a lot of opportunities to meet in the office, but also in the field. Really incredible people that really coached me right away, like the value of planning in advance and having a plan ABC, and the value to really strategize to put in place a structure, having the right people and really to foster the collaboration, which is, I think, one of the topics we'll touch base on today. But really, I really truly value the collaboration within a project, and that's a key success factor to ultimately meet the project objective.
Thanks so much. Julie, good morning. Please introduce yourself to those listening to Powerful Connections.
Hey, good morning, Dean. Thanks for the invite. It's a great subject to discuss this morning. For myself, I joined the energy sector around 20 years ago, and it was at the time that we started to do the large-scale utility wind farm in Quebec. At that time, that they were having 20 years, very lucrative, publicly known PPAs at $130 a megawatt hour back in the early 2000 years, and then I've started in that time. I was actually working for a consultant, which is now really well known as a DNV, but it was called a Helimax at that time. So that's how I got introduced in the energy sector. And after I joined TransAlta back in 2006, 2007 for about 13 years. So then I've started to work on wind, solar. I touched a bit gas as well at that time for those projects. And then I joined INNERGEX 2 years ago as the lead of construction and major contracting.
Well, you've been busy. As discussed in the episode introduction, Julie and Amélie work at INNERGEX Renewables Inc. Julie, give us a quick background, high level of who INNERGEX is.
INNERGEX is a private power producer. So we develop, own, and operate our renewable projects in wind, solar, storage, and hydro. And it's a publicly traded company, partially owned by Hydro-Québec. And we have 90 assets now. We just commissioned our last assets in Wyoming, which is 330 megawatts installed capacity wind farm in Wyoming. And we're about having 4,600 megawatts as installed capacity in Canada, United States, Chile, and France.
I want to congratulate both you and your organization on all the generation projects you're involved in. And I know you are busy in Canada and the US. In late 2024, you received in BC and Quebec 5 new generation projects with forecasted commercial operation dates, or as people call it, COD, in 2030, 2031. I know a lot of these projects, most of them are Indigenous equity partners. I became familiar with INNERGEX probably 20 years ago when we built the Umbata Falls 115 kV transmission line interconnect for Pick Heron First Nation in Northwestern Ontario with INNERGEX. I commend you on your market presence in the Indigenous economic development you are continuing to do. And today we're going to discuss the benefits and review the risk reduction of good integrated project planning. Amélie, your statement to me last year when you inquired about being on Powerful Connections was the construction and energy market is hot and in continuously changing. And this will be an interesting discussion. So I thank you for your patience in getting here, but here we are. So start us off with some high-level comments to get us going on this discussion.
That's an interesting one. And this statement actually remained fully true, even like 1 year later, Dean. So the number of projects in the energy sector to develop and build in Canada and in US and around the world, just in terms of dollar in Canada, it's more than like 100 billions, say, for the next 10 years of investment. So it tells a lot about the growth in the energy sector and all the work that all together we need to share resources and that we need to put in place. So I think that definitely managing major projects nowadays is complex, not to say it was not in the past. The pace of like evolution of number of consideration or factors actually brings a complexity for sure nowadays. I think one of the way to ensure actually that your project will be successful, it really goes through like the risk management. And I would also say the agility actually of the people to adjust the plan based on the evolving condition. Being agile actually is definitely key. You can make the best plan, but if you don't adapt it throughout your project with a number of evolving circumstances, well, you can pass some good opportunities to really mitigate the risk that you are facing. So I think the risk management aspect is a key consideration that needs to be definitely like a strong focus on. Just to name maybe a few, like I would say the evolution of the technology. When I started also like and being more involved with like synchronous machine, when we're generating energy for hydro, there's not that much of electronics that was there, like the protective relays or even the machine themselves. Like the technology was lasting for many more years before you needed as an engineer, but also as an organization to upgrade or to keep up with the knowledge on it. So nowadays, when we got into like the wind farm, but even more with the PV modules and the battery storage with the inverters, the changes is tremendous. Like just to give a little bit of perspective into that, when you bid on a project, we saw with like the COD of 2031 for BC, like it's a 6-7 years window before the time that you get a project and you really start like doing the engineering and the time that you will have a COD. And when you look for about like the PV modules, for instance, there's a number of different models that will came in. And by the time that you get to install your modules, sometimes they would get obsolete or they will not be as efficient as the newest model. So there's really a trade-off in terms of what's the best time to procure your equipment in order to be ready and have them available when your schedule needs them, but also in order to take advantage also of like the newest technology. And that's just the evolution of technology also brings complexity. But again, there's a number of other conditions that like during the life cycle of a project that we'll have to face, like politic changes is obviously one that influence financial incentive, such as a tariff, like the material costs also with the raw material index that got introduced with like cables, transformer, and so on. all the social requirements that also influence permitting and that are continuously involving the environmental, community engagement, and availability of manpower, obviously. So just again, I think the approach that was used to deliver the project also is evolving. And when I talk about that, is also including like the contract. I think that's one key consideration to be allowed to cope all this the circumstances that we will face within like a 6-7 years window for a project.
Interesting that you go from hydroelectric, which has been around for more than a century, to more complicated things that are very involved today. And there isn't that one size fits all solution, and it depends upon the project and the outcome and the assets you're developing. So, Julie, what are the fundamental differences you've seen over your time between Canada and the US when you're dealing with these early stages of these projects and developing them that you know they're going to take a long time?
As you said, there's no one size fits all solution, but there's a trend in different markets, what I've seen. And this is based from my experience and previous work. I've been working in a lot of states in the United States and in Canada, in all various provinces. And in Canada, the path is led by the public utility, mainly issuing RFPs, as Amélie said, like with some fixed price PPA that you commit for, that you're going to have to build and commission in 6, 7, 8 years from now, which is a totally different risk profile that you got to take. And opposed to in the US, you're going to develop and you're going to go way further into the development process before setting up your PPA price. In the US, it's not led by the public RFPs. It's going to be led by land or interconnection. And then you're going to find a PPA. So there's two different approach, which bring two different risk profile on each location.
So to expand on that a little bit, let's continue that thought. Do you find your experience that the US or Canada takes more time and expense to get to a start point or that point of securing that power purchase agreement?
I wouldn't say it takes more time. It's just a total different risk profile in the time that you develop your project. So for me, I mean, we're used to say now, and I've been hearing this a lot, that for wind and solar, the resource available is not relevant anymore because you got solar, you got this everywhere. And for wind, with the machine we're having right now, you can have a very low wind area and you can find a machine that's going to deliver you the power you need. The path is led by interconnection. So interconnection is the key, even more in the US. In Canada, most of the time, the public utility is going to tell you where the interconnection will be. Opposed in the US, you need to find out. And there's really a big competitivity on this, and to find that interconnection and to find the land. So that's a bit different. So yes, I would say that it takes a long time to develop a project in the US. We have a big project pipeline ready to deploy whenever you need to. And it's really typical for the US. You secure your land, you get in the queue and interconnection, and as soon as you get your queue interconnection, then you can start chasing a PPA, which is a bit different in Canada, that you're going to start having your PPA. So I think that the time is a bit the same. However, you're going to fix your PPA price in a different timing, which is going to be probably later in the States and sooner in Canada. So you got to have to work in Canada, which way more assumption of your construction costs, which bring another level of risk. But what's happening right now that could create a big risk on what's going to be the exchange rate in the next little future here. So if I buy turbines now and I want to put a construction cost for now for what's going to look like in 2028, I need to make big assumptions now to understand what's going to be my purchase price.
The risk in escalation is definitely something that you have to be prepared for and have that flexibility. And that's tough when you're trying to fix costs of something. Amélie, as we identify the risk of projects further, some are common and known recognized risks in the industry, and you can probably identify them real quick before you start a job. But others are more project specific. So what are the common risks that your projects are facing nowadays?
You need to have a good assumptions that you rely on in order to fix your price. That is your starting point, I would say. So, okay, I need to deliver based on that price in order to get the ROI that I'm expecting. So when construction starts, there's a good exercise of identifying or updating the risk matrix. What are the common risks during construction project that you need to keep in mind and have a strategy actually to mitigate those risks? The first one was about project management, which is people. How people are important, how like the resource, and compared to my experience like in operation and now in construction, that's one thing that I was able really to see from another perspective how true this is, because when you look about like a construction project and managing project, we know about the people, but we really rely on the people to implement the processes and to talk to each other, to collaborate and remind each other, oh, have you forget about this? We should adjust our commissioning schedule. We should bring more people because we have like additional risk coming, or like the people is making a big difference. And when we talk about project management, pre-construction planning is one of the key consideration for not being able to identify the risk in advance, and that influence ultimately the construction. There's also scope change. I think that's one thing that during construction we have to face. But as much scope change you have during your construction, how impactful your schedule will be and your costs eventually also. But if you need to update your permit at one point because the scope change, well, that's definitely going to create some downtime from the contractor. You need to readjust your plan and so on. And the engineering that needs to lead also this permitting. So definitely scope change is one of the key factors that influence the success of your project. Communication, again, they were talking about clear roles and responsibilities. That's definitely something about who's doing what and avoiding like some gaps. And that's something key to put into your project execution. And as a project manager, to always ensure that people understand their role in the project. We talk about being agile, but in terms of like people want to stick to the plan. But if you ignore the red flags that you're facing, you can also impact the success of your project. Unrealistic schedule. If you start your project with unrealistic schedule, it's going to be hard to meet your COD. So a lot of things related to project management, but also I can say that like the second one was about managing the inventory at site, and the third one was productivity. So that's all risk that we are facing during the construction, really like that, like boots on the ground, and that things that we need to keep in mind. Don't lose parts, because know where your parts are when you need them, with the lead time that we're facing, and especially when you're in remote location. I would say that also bring another project specific that we're talking about, that the risk is different when you're in remote location. So a lot of interesting challenges, but that's the role of project management and the organization to implement good strategies to mitigate those.
The managing of people and logistics is the key critical item that people forget about and probably don't see, because they don't see the logistics till a moment in time they need a piece of equipment, and having things in the queue ready to go in the right spot is just critical, and the right people in the right place is critical. Next, Julie, I want to talk about what you feel the main items are that you use to help define what critical items are when creating a project execution schedule.
It's a good segue, Dean, and I need to mention that Amélie, when she joined INNERGEX almost a year ago now, she took over a very challenging project in Hawaii on Big Island. So INNERGEX is building a 30 megawatt solar farm there on the side of the volcano, with a storage component to this project. And when Amélie took over, it was probably not even halfway to construction, and she needed to step in a team, and everything that she just mentioned in her last intervention here is really something that she had to take over and start leading with a new team and put a team together.
So tell us a little bit about what you
Yeah.
feel is critical in a project execution plan.
And for me, I've been involved in a lot of projects in my career as a developer. I did work on construction site and also spent a lot of years working on operation. So I've been fortunate to touch every cycle of the project. So I know for a fact what's taken to develop a good project for having a de-risk as much as possible construction project and a successful operation for a long term. Choosing your right equipment and the right contractor at the right price is the key, really. And in our world right now, the contractor selection will not be just only price driven. Sometimes your PPA price is fixed years and years in advance. So you need to work with a contractor that you trust, that has the experience, and you know that will be able to deliver. That's really the key thing here. And that's the way that we're selecting contractors. And for me, early in the game, as soon as we start purchasing equipment and spending a lot of money on projects, we need a really good project reporting to bring up to the upper management to make sure we have really good executive summary of projects at any time giving through the life cycle of the project that would tell you who's the team, what's the main milestones, what are the finance metric. Those are really the key. The budget, of course, where it is, because sometimes you have your class 3 estimate and you're going toward your class 5, and when are you going to set your budget baseline? So that's another key. The schedule with contingency, because there is a real trend on keeping contingencies and risk provision on budget, but I see I've been working mainly with project owner, and I could see working with contractor and suppliers, they always have contingencies in their schedule. So when I work on my owner schedule, I also need to put contingencies. So that's another other key things, and the risk matrix that is constantly evolving and updated. And sometimes risks are going away, sometimes they go in the budget and they become concrete. So that's really the four pillars. I want to also to always have a clear project picture at any given time until the end of construction. That's my way to see it.
Well, it sounds like the voice of experience speaking well. Amélie, there's a couple of approaches to projects that we're going to get into. The traditional method known as engineer, procure, construct, or EPC, which is utilized when the clear scope of work is established. This requires less interaction with the owner or involvement by the owner. And then there's the EPCM, which works well when the scope is not as well defined at the start of the project, and it'll bring the owner in for a little more involvement, but it'll require managing contracts as they progress, and that's a fun one to do. So tell us a little bit about these models.
So that's one of the thing about like which model would really fit your project based on the project specifics. First, understanding like the risk or the pros and cons on each model and when to use it is definitely key. So we see a little bit more in construction, like the EPC model nowadays. It doesn't mean that the EPCM is not a choice. You need to be ready to tackle EPCM as a IPP because it requires a lot more internal resources. Definitely when you operate, I still see some value of having this owner's involvement because you can bring your preference and you're involved ready to operate also to for a number of years after. So definitely it has this advantage, but you need to be ready to have the resource and the good one in place. So that's why I would say the EPC seems the more interesting one. The pace that we're referring to and all the risks that we are facing. Well, this is where this model that seems to, so the advantage of APC also is early stage, you could have like a price in order to fix your budget, as Julie was mentioning. In early stage, you have a contractor involved and gives you a price, and that's what you use. However, we're talking about scope change. We're talking about a number of factors that evolve throughout your life cycles. The EPC doesn't cover you for those. So scope change will come into play, which influence ultimately your budget. So it seems that it almost become an illusion that the EPC provides you a fixed price in early stage that you can rely on. So to get into this new model, which is interesting. They call it like a IPD, integrated power delivery model that creates a lot of discussion, I would say, nowadays. It came out a little bit during COVID, but it's based on model that were used in Australia prior to with different names. There's a good actually document from PwC on that explaining those models from a less to more collaborative. And I think this is what this integrated that model is really about, is increasing collaboration within each parties in order to create the incentive for engineering for contractor to meet the schedule or and manage the risk all together and have an open book kind of. It's really foster like a kind of a good faith. So this is where it's going to be interesting to see how it evolves over time and how those contracts can be written in order to try to cover those situations. But definitely that's one that is foster collaboration, which is, I feel, key to have a successful project. But it's going to be interesting to see how it really concretizes and how we can deliver it until the end of a project.
So the solutions, as a project gets more complicated, become very important to have the right team, the openness, the transparency, the collaboration, and it involves handling scope, handling logistics, handling design changes, handling risk, and the risk becomes a shared item. So the role and responsibilities becomes very critical at the start, and the risk matrix above how you handle the risk. So very, very critical items and can get very detailed. So we'll get into a few more things as we go along over these days. But for this episode, I want to thank both of you for being on Powerful Connections. This was very informative. It will stir a lot of discussions for listeners. But before we close the episode, I'd like to ask you both for a few closing words. So Amélie, if you can provide a few parting thoughts on creating a project delivery plan.
Engaging the right resource at the right time is probably the main one. So especially in construction like that, you can develop the great processes like your lessons learned that come back into your project planning. You can hire the people with relevant experience, develop clear risk matrix. But if you can't build this environment, this atmosphere to motivate them to give their 100% ultimately and to share like within the team and be sure we have people covering each other and creating this atmosphere that motivate them. And it's true for, I would say, that the project management team, like the owner, but it's also true the contractor. We have this risk number 3 kind of about productivity. Like when you're at site and people come to site in the morning, come to work and are happy, they will deliver. They will work together. They will have their tools ready. They're gonna like talk together and mitigate the risk about trying the right method to do the work efficiently. If you don't create this atmosphere, you lose productivity ultimately. This is all about people. This people consideration is probably the main one. And it's not easy to keep that throughout the entire project duration either. Sometimes you need to rotate people and you need to have strategies to introduce. When you change project management or project manager, it may seem first like, oh, lose some knowledge or XYZ reason. But I think it could also create a new waves coming in, like new enthusiasts of someone, and you bring someone that has the right skills for, let's say, for commissioning to like continue and manage the project. So having the right partners, it's good for engineering, for contractors, and defining actually the right contract agreement to create those incentives that foster collaboration is probably the key one, I would say.
The critical path items become very important in that collaboration because you say there's going to be subject matter experts that come in and out of the project at various times, but somebody's managing the whole thing, and it's that key person that's the point of contact between developer, contractor, owner, that little internal group. But you're going to have that 8, 10, 12, 15 people that are critical to the thing happening over the life of the project. It's exciting when that group performs at a high level and 100%. Is enthusiastic about what they do. Julie, please leave us a closing remark for our listeners to think about.
I like the critical path thing. When we look at a project, the critical path, if you think about it, each little section of the project as its own critical path. The one that we just finished in Wyoming, you could feel that spirit, that everybody in that team, including contractors and supplier, were heading to the same critical path. And this is what I think it makes successful, is as Amélie said, like it was relying on the people working on those projects, and really everybody. It was an EPC type of contract where we found that the EPC contractor was really owning the project, and everybody was driving into the same direction to get finished on time, and that we were able to deliver a successful project. The construction world is in constant change, so we need to find innovative solution to deal with lead time that are being changed by war that's happening, or political change, or those tariff and the transportation changes. So we got to find innovative way to share the risk all together, and not just having, because as I said, as an IPP, our price of the electricity that we sign with the buyer will not change. So we got to work all together to find a way to fit that circle in a square to make it to the finish line. So everybody is going to make their profit on this project, and it's going to work.
This has been a great discussion. Thanks very much. In this episode, we discuss various models of project delivery to handle risk mitigation and how this evolves during the life cycle of a successful project. We also look at the risk management differences between projects developed in Canada and in the US in the generation sector. Rainey, what are your observations from the chat with Amélie and Julie?
Well, Dean, Amélie and Julie told us quite a story about a lot of growth in energy projects, and the complexity of the projects have increased, affected by economy, material availability, tariffs, and politics. So they indicated the key to successful project management is risk management and agility to adapt to the ever-changing conditions of all of these things. Technology is evolving rapidly. If a project takes several years from the time an initial design is done for submitting a bid to the time to start construction, some components may be obsolete or may not be the most efficient design. And the cost of these components and cable materials may have increased significantly. So all of these things add to the complexity of projects today compared to, say, doing projects 20 years ago. Amélie and Julie identified the differences for us between doing a project in Canada versus the US. In Canada, the public utilities issue an RFP for a certain connection point. Many come with a fixed price PPA, otherwise called a power purchase agreement, and that must be built in, say, 6 to 8 years. Well, this creates many assumptions of what construction costs will be 6 to 8 years from now. In the United States, the projects are done a little bit differently. They're led by a LAN, or a local area network, or a predetermined interconnection point. Julie stated she'll be much further into the design before a PPA is signed. The land is obtained for a project, and then you get into the queue for an interconnection. So there's no power purchase agreement available until there's an interconnection. So like she said, much further down the road. Two very different approaches and two very different risk profiles. Amélie discussed for us the risks to manage and some of the keys to success that she's found over the years. And I think her points went like this: having the right people to manage the project, implement processes, adapt to changes, and effectively construct the project is very important. Next for her was pre-construction, planning to identify and plan to manage the risks, especially scope changes that may happen. Effective communication within the team was certainly a very big key for her. And then have a realistic schedule and an ability to deliver on the schedule. So that's what I picked up. Over to you, Dean.
From what I can see, key takeaways from our discussion with Amélie and Julie are managing projects is complex and relies heavily on risk management and the ability of the key people involved to control the outcomes for a successful project. The energy sector developments happening are massive, and the emerging technology has pushed the boundaries of risk mitigation and execution planning. So having the right project management plan for the scope of work is critical to the success of the project. The tracking and managing of the 4 project pillars of charter, budget, schedule, risk are required for a clear picture of the ongoing project for successful outcomes. The 3 main project delivery models are engineer, procure, construct, engineer, procure, and construction management, and integrated project delivery. The right solution will be developed during project execution planning. Look forward to hearing from you after you listen to each episode. I encourage you to subscribe to Powerful Connections wherever you get your podcasts. Share the podcast with those you feel will find it interesting and useful. Connect with me on my website at dgg5advising.com or find me on LinkedIn at Dean G. Gation.